Welcome to the Daily 15 with your host, Jay Real. Welcome to another edition of the Daily 15. We're going back to the format tonight. We do have 3 new topics for you that have been trending in the news today. The first of which, we have another candidate, folks, for president in 2016. The Florida boy, Senator Marco Rubio, has officially made his campaign to run for president official today. So we have a third contender on the Republican side now. He joins Senator Ted Cruz and Senator Rand Paul as being a candidate for president. We still are awaiting the quote-unquote big gun of the Republican Party, Jeb Bush, but today is all about Marco Rubio. For me, Marco Rubio is an interesting candidate. Interesting because, to me, he has that President Obama flair from 2008. Unlike his counterparts that will be running, even if Jeb Bush joins the race, I don't think any of them have the charisma that Marco Rubio brings to the table. I think that's the biggest thing that's going to make him unique when he comes to his counterparts, is he's going to have that charisma. He's got that winning smile like Obama did when he was running. He's going to say pretty much tagline Republican or conservative ideas. So the things that he says are going to be fairly similar to what Cruz would do, as well as Rand Paul. The only contender that he probably be, is diverse from is going to be Jeb Bush, which then candidate Obama was pretty tagline Democratic at the time. But he's going to have the charisma and the personality, I believe, to bring in not only those conservative Republicans, but also bring in some of those on-the-fence Democrats as well, which that to me makes him the most interesting candidate in the Republican field that has been acknowledged thus far, because he's going to have that charisma. Ted Cruz to me is that guy that you either like him or you don't. There's no in-between. You either like him or you don't. And when you're running for president, you need some in-between. Rand Paul is kind of carrying the mantra of his father. His father, by a lot of standards, people considered his father on the fence, in the sense as whether or not they liked him. He kind of also had that same flair. You either liked him or you didn't. But Marco Rubio, I believe, is going to have that charisma to really take him forward, at least, assuming he becomes candidate, Marco Rubio, to take him forward and actually bring in those middle-of-the-road people, those mid-ground people that are going to be needed in order to actually win the presidency. I think if there was a scared candidate on the Democrats' behalf, I think it had to be Marco Rubio, because I think everybody else they're going to put up, you're going to pretty much like them or not like them. There's not going to be a whole lot of in-between, but Rubio has the charisma. He's still young enough to relate to a lot of different people. When you consider what's going on now between U.S. and Cuba, I know that there's no in-between there. You either support the U.S.-Cuban relations that President Obama is trying to develop, or you are against them. And so obviously he's against them. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays into this, because for all accounts, the business of doing relations with Cuba is seeming to be moving forward. I know here in the state of Florida, companies are already lining up to begin some kind of flights into Cuba for people from several destinations. I know they're working on something here out of Orlando. I know they're working on things in Tampa. I'm sure things are happening in Miami as well. And I'm sure more cities are going to follow, being that Florida is that closest destination. So there may be a lot of people against this idea, but business is moving forward. And pretty soon, the business of doing relationships with Cuba is going to be so big that the opposition against it is not going to matter. I think Marco's going to have to lay an egg on that one. But keep the fight, man. Marco Rubio's in. We'll see what happens. My next story, man, going back to the St. Louis area. Ferguson's kind of been out of the news. We're not really talking about Ferguson anymore. But in that St. Louis area, they did have some elections recently. Kudos to the people in Ferguson. They actually had an election where they elected 2 African Americans or blacks to city council. So now the city council has 3 members that are black, which is half of the city council. So that's good. They also saw an increase in voter turnout in that particular special election they had as well for that. Here's the unfortunate part. It seems like the neighboring towns, though, aren't catching the message so much. The people around in the neighboring towns aren't really showing up to the polls. They also had some special elections in some cities around Ferguson. I'm just going to read out the numbers to you here to show you how much of a low voter turnout some of these neighboring towns had. So the first one they talk about is Calverton Park. The city itself is about a little less than a half a mile. It has about 1,200, little over 1,200 people there as of 2010. And they had a vote for mayor, and 190 people showed up to vote for the mayor. 190 people, approximately 1,300 people that lived there. 190 showed up to vote for the mayor. Interesting part about that particular town, 66% of the revenues that they generate for that department are raised from fines and fees. Sounds a little like Ferguson to me. The next one, Normandy, is another town close by. Normandy is almost 2 square miles. Population in Normandy, about 5,000 people. There, they were voting in several different wards there. In Ward 1, they had 118 voters show up. In Ward 2, they had 91 show up. In Ward 3, they had 94 show up. And in Ward 4, they had 72 show up. There were almost 5,000 people that live in that city. And between 4 different wards, they had less than 400 people show up to vote for the offices that were up for grabs in that particular election. Wow. 40% of their revenues are generated from fines and fees that are raised from the people. Next one, Moline Acres. Moline Acres has approximately 2,500 people that live in Moline Acres. They were voting for mayor. They had 328 people show up to vote for mayor. 328 people. Edmondson has about 834 people that live in Edmondson. It's about as big as a quarter of a mile. 91 voters showed up to vote in the elections there for mayor. 91, 834. St. Anne's is about 3.2 miles. 13,000 people live in St. Anne's. 948 of those showed up to vote for the mayor. 244 of those showed up to vote in Ward 1. The last one I'll read here is Pine Lawn. Pine Lawn has about 3,400 residents. They were voting for some offices across 4 different wards as well. They had 119 in Ward 1, 87 in Ward 2, 126 in Ward 3, 119 in Ward 4. So 3,400 people, approximately 500 of those people showed up to vote. They as well have about 50% of their revenue from fines and fees. I don't know that any of these particular areas are experiencing high crime, or any of these particular areas are experiencing some of the same issues in Ferguson, but what is clear is that we certainly have neighboring towns where the people aren't engaged as they were not engaged in Ferguson. So hopefully Ferguson had a little bit of a turnaround in these special elections that were held the same day as these particular elections. Hopefully, as we move forward in the future, these people too will see the importance of showing up to vote and potentially and at least acknowledging that you're paying attention to what's happening in your city. As we can attest for in cities across America, if you're not showing up to vote and make your voice heard, then nobody's listening to your voice. As a result, when you see things happening in your city that you don't like, because you didn't show up to vote, it makes your voice a little less prominent when it hits the fan. I cannot stress how important voting is for all of us. For all of us. I know a lot of times when you vote, sometimes you feel like it's not giving you the immediate impact that you were wanting it to have, but that is still a part of the voting process. The one thing that you learn when you begin voting is that actually striking that name, bubbling in that name, swiping that card, however it is that you vote in your particular city or town, that's important. But there's also a second process in that, and that you have to now follow up and hold the people who you voted for accountable for whatever issues you're looking for them to address. So it's a two-step process. Yes, you have to bubble in the name, but the second part of that is you have to hold them accountable. You have to let them know you're paying attention to what they are doing or not doing. You have to follow up with calls. You have to follow up with emails when the thing that you want them to do is not being done. Ferguson, the towns surrounding Ferguson, should be a sounding of the alarm for everyone across this country, because the problems that we're seeing there are not exclusive to that particular city. It's just that particular city has been in the news lately. But the same problems that they have there are the same problems we face across this country. And until we wholeheartedly show up as people and begin representing our votes, we're going to see some of the same problems exist over and over and over and over again. Let's show up and show them what it is we want them to do. Lastly, keeping it a little light. Everybody knows Suge Knight is currently facing jail time due to an incident where he has allegedly tried to run over some gentlemen that he says were trying to assault him. And so they're working on developing the case. The case against him is still developing in court. But one interesting thing that happened recently is one of the gentlemen, who is the accused individual that they say he attempted to murder, actually was a key witness in the case. So he was on the stand, supposedly there to testify against Suge Knight. And when the prosecutor asked him questions related to the incident, the man essentially basically said, "I don't know who that man is, and I can't tell you anything that he may or may not have done." The man's name is Claybone Sloan. And so as the story reads here, he was on the stand at one of the hearings for the trial. The prosecutor was asking him to give testimony as to what happened in the event. And the man said on the stand, "I will not be used to send Suge Knight to prison." The prosecutor asked him, "Well, can you point out if Suge Knight is even in the room?" The man said, "That doesn't look like Mr. Knight to me." Here's what I find hilarious about this whole thing. I understand that there is a culture, and this man describes himself as a non-active gang member. I understand that there's a culture of no snitching, but I find it hilarious that this man volunteers to, because he has to volunteer or at least subpoena to go on the stand. But once he gets on the stand, he refuses to acknowledge anything related to the incident whatsoever. This from the man who apparently tried to kill him by running over a car, and he still refuses to say anything about this man. Now, I don't know if he's scared because of who they say Suge Knight is, and that's why he's refusing to testify anything negative about him, or if he's truly, he follows that mantra, no snitching. I don't know. Either way, I find it incredibly hilarious that they would get him all the way up to the stand, and then he'd get on the stand and then support absolutely nothing the prosecutor was alleging. Therefore, the prosecutor looking like a complete fool, because it's like, if the man that is accused of being almost killed by my defendant won't even acknowledge my defendant's presence in the courtroom, or whatever involvement he may or may not have, how in the world am I going to prove this case and prove that this man is actually either attempted murderer and murderer? Those are the two charges that he's facing. I just find that extremely hilarious and slightly ironic as well, man. It's going to be interesting to see if they can actually pin him down. This actually is going to be his third strike if he is convicted. So he's looking at 25 to life. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Suge Knight has always been a character, especially on the hip hop scene. And so it's going to be interesting to see what happens. They say he's also that man that if you go to LA, as a rapper anyway, as you go to LA, you got to pay a tax. They're also trying to catch him on that too. Because the allegations are, if you're a rapper and you're going to LA, you need to pay a tax to Suge Knight so that you can be safe in the city while you're there. And if you're not paying the tax, anything's possible. So they're actually trying to catch him up on that too. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens. But that's hilarious. The key witness in the whole trial, the witness that's going to prove that he actually tried to kill him, gets on the stand and says, I'm not really sure if that is Mr. Knight, and I really don't know what you're referring to.